Now turning to the United States, you've had talks about possible sanctions either on Russia as a state or individual members of their leadership or on Putin individually. Money very quickly was allocated to help out Ukraine. My assumption as a progressive is that there will be a lot more of that money coming, particularly after some of pulling out of the Middle East that we've done recently out of Afghanistan. I feel like they're looking for a place to put some money. That's my fear. So are you not worried that what Biden is doing in terms of the threats of the sanctions or the money going in, that might not increase the risk of conflict? What effect do you think it's likely to have?
That's actually an excellent question. And one of the things that I'm writing in several pieces about the moral, what a moral progressive thinker ought to think about security is that it's a legitimate concern when you think about U.S. involvement around the world. And so, yes, we should definitely be concerned about American motives. But in regards to whether or not it will lead to an escalation, I think people here are saying they've gone through so many escalations that based on a non-reaction from Ukraine, right? So this escalation that we see of 175,000 troops, you would think Ukraine did something in order to create that, or the United States did something in order to create that, or NATO did something in order to create that. It would be one thing if NATO pushed, let's say, 50,000 troops along the Baltic border, along Russia's border. That has not happened. Okay, that has not happened. And the 3,000 troops that were deployed, I think there were about 1,700 troops that were deployed from Fort Bragg that were going into Eastern Europe, which were going to go into Romania. When you think about 1,700 or 3,000 U.S. troops that are comprising the NATO contingency there, which are pretty much used for evacuation support in case you have refugees or people coming through the west of Ukraine into Poland, into Romania, into Slovakia. That's what that contingency is primarily for. It'll be one thing if there are 50,000 troops, right? So if there are 50,000 troops, then you can have a legitimate conversation about, okay, then they're doing, then the Americans are doing something and they're planning some type of attack, which would justify this 170,000 troops that the Kremlin has along the Ukrainian border, along with Belarus. But that's not what's happening here. And when you ask me about the money or finances that are coming here, primarily what Biden is doing, which I agree with his policy approach right now, because diplomacy is still in motion. And they've made, Washington and Brussels have made very clear that they're not going to enact sanctions unless an attack happens. Some people, including Bill Browder, who I interviewed for Spaces the other day, said that the sanctions should continue right now, with basically 4 people around in Putin's inner circle being sanctioned every day that the troop buildup does not decrease. So there are plenty of people who are calling for sanctions right now, but that has not happened. So so there are a lot of voices that are wrongly, approaching this from a hawkish perspective. I think like there's a fetish that a lot of hawks had with the USSR and the Cold War. Again, I would love to talk about that in another shit segment because I think it's ridiculous. But what's happening right now is diplomacy down to the wire. And yes, the money and military aid that's coming here, I don't think that it's going to create any more of an escalation that's already happened without Ukraine or Brussels or Washington doing anything to create what's happening in the first place right now.
Okay. And I know obviously other countries, could have made some indications of potentially how they would respond to a conflict so far. And I know this is sort of projecting forward, but based on what you know, do you think that the threats of the economic reprisals or possibly not interfering with pipeline projects and things like that can successfully stop a conflict from happening? Do you see that playing out that way, or do you think that the wheels are in motion and you think that there's a better than 50% chance of a conflict? Where do you think this is going?
Well, first, there's definitely better than a 50% chance of a conflict because the deployments that are taking place, as I said earlier, are dictating that it pretty much can happen at any moment. So the chances are more than 50-50 in regards to sanctions. Sanctions are a very complex business, right? And so in the ways in which you decide if a sanction works or doesn't work, it's pretty subjective. It depends on how you want them to be. It depends on how they're deployed and what you want to do. Now, for example, we talk about Iran, we know that they're a complete failure, right? And so right now, they're not only are they a complete failure, I would suggest that they're very racist in nature. But again, another conversation. But as it applies to Russia, the thing about Russia, what makes sanctions so hard, because there are currently sanctions against Russia right now, particularly with drilling projects in the north, because the technology that Russia needs in order to drill for natural resources, they don't produce that in Russia, right? That's technology that's exported from America, Europe, et cetera. And so in regards to the current the sanction regimes that are being considered, including taxing the inner circle of Putin, those could be effective, right? Because ultimately, what Putin really cares about is his money, and that's what his inner circle cares about. But what's really most important with sanctions, and I think this is a hard pill for a lot of American lawmakers to really accept. America has its own kleptocratic culture. It's not Russian by any standards, but we do have a kleptocratic culture that was really exploited by former President Donald Trump, right? And we saw his kleptocratic attitudes and mores in the White House. And so there are a number of loopholes that allow Kremlin-aligned oligarchs to exploit loopholes, in real estate, in real estate where oligarchs can offshore their money with property, and then also offshore their money in American U.S. institutions, which, by the way, it started after the Soviet Union. The KGB was very knowledgeable about the loopholes in American financial systems. And so there's another thing, too, you have to be aware of, is that on K Street in Washington, D.C., Russian oligarchs spend upwards of $30 to $50 million per year lobbying Congress. Right. And so it's not just Russia that needs to be that needs to really be targeted. It's our own American financial infrastructure, because American institutions are too benefiting from this Russian oligarch. And so it's not just about Russia. And again, that's why I say it's so complex, and there's so many tentacles that are involved in this. And also Europe would have to agree with that, because you have you have Germany, for example, where you had the former Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder, who is currently working, for a major Russian gas company as chairperson. And so, what are the ways in which European leaders, or any leader for that matter from the U.S., would not be able to work for the Kremlin or anyone else, where they can use their political power? For example, with Gerhard Schroeder, where the Russians can come in and manipulate the political process, because at the end of the day, the reason why Germany is so insecure in regards to energy is because they have not found alternative resources outside of the Kremlin, and also too, they too have an issue of what's more important, the financial and democratic security of your country or money. That's not just a question for France or Germany. That is a question for the United States of America as well. So we can look at Putin and be the big boogeyman, which is true, but we also have to look at the boogeyman in us, which is the United States of America financial institution.
Well, I am definitely ready to have that conversation anytime. And look, as I think should have been clear going in, but definitely with your last response, it's a complicated topic. So we definitely appreciate you taking time out, especially considering what time it is right now in Kiev. So thank you so much for joining us. And hopefully, as things develop, we can talk some more. Hopefully there's no emergency need to, but hopefully we can continue this conversation.
I'm here. I do this for a living. That's why I'm here. I'm on the ground so I can gather information. This is my life's work, and that's awesome. What I do.
Well, thank you very much, Terrell, Jermaine, Starr. As always, we appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.